I've never shared a bed, she whispered. The cowboy smiled. Then tonight you'll share my heart too. What happens when a woman fleeing scandal meets a rancher who sees past her shame? When bullets fly and secrets surface, can two broken souls build something whole? This is Evelyn's story, a journey from Philadelphia's gilded prison to Wyoming's untamed freedom, where love isn't found in ballrooms but in dust, sweat, and shared silence under endless skies. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, and Evelyn Harper's gloved hands gripped the worn leather seat. Dust billowed through the open window, coating her navy traveling dress in a fine layer of Wyoming grit. She'd been riding for 3 days straight, first by train from Philadelphia, then by this bone-rattling coach through landscapes that grew progressively wilder, more alien, more liberating with each passing mile. Her maid, Margaret, sat across from her, pale-faced and miserable. "Miss Evelyn, are you certain about this madness? It's not too late to turn back." Evelyn didn't answer. Instead, she stared out at Sweetwater Ridge, a collection of weathered buildings that could barely call itself a town. A general store, a saloon with faded lettering, a blacksmith's forge sending up lazy spirals of smoke, and everywhere that impossible sky, so vast it made her chest ache with something between terror and exhilaration. Turn back? To what? To the whispers that followed her through Philadelphia's cobblestone streets? To her mother's tears and her father's cold fury? To the scandal that had made her name unmentionable in polite society? No. There was no going back. "We're here," she said quietly, gathering her carpet bag. "This is home now." Margaret made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob, but Evelyn ignored it. She'd given the older woman a choice back in Pennsylvania, stay or come west. Margaret had chosen to follow, though she'd made her displeasure known every mile of the journey. The driver yanked open the door, his weathered face impassive. "Sweetwater Ridge, ladies. Watch your step." Evelyn accepted his calloused hand and stepped down onto the dusty street. The June heat hit her like a physical thing, different from Philadelphia's humid summers. This was dry, relentless, unforgiving. She raised a hand to shield her eyes from the glare and took her first real look at the town that would be her new life. That's when she heard it, the crack of a gunshot, sharp and unmistakable. For a frozen heartbeat, Evelyn couldn't move, couldn't process what she'd heard. Then the world exploded into chaos. "Get down!" A man's voice, urgent and commanding. More shots rang out, a rapid succession that sent her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, Margaret screamed. The stagecoach driver cursed and dove for cover, and Evelyn stood paralyzed in the middle of the street, watching as two men on horseback thundered past, guns blazing, pursued by what looked like half the town's male population. Strong hands grabbed her waist, yanking her sideways. She stumbled, her carpetbag flying from her grip, and suddenly she was falling, being pulled down behind a large wooden water trough. Her shoulder hit the ground hard, knocking the breath from her lungs. "Stay down," that same commanding voice said, close to her ear now. Evelyn pressed herself against the rough wood, her heart racing so fast she thought it might burst. The shooting continued, sharp cracks followed by the splintering of wood, the ping of bullets hitting metal. She squeezed her eyes shut, her hands clasped over her head in a gesture that felt utterly futile. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the gunfire stopped. The silence that followed felt almost violent in its suddenness. Evelyn became aware of several things simultaneously: the taste of dust in her mouth, the painful thudding of her heart, the solid warmth of another body pressed against her left side, shielding her from the street. She opened her eyes and turned her head. The man beside her was tall. She could tell that even though they were both crouched behind the trough. He wore a tan shirt, dusty from the road, and a leather vest. A weathered Stetson hat sat low on his head, shadowing his face. But what caught her attention were his eyes. Steel blue, steady, assessing her with an intensity that made her breath catch for an entirely different reason than the gunfight. "You hit?" he asked. His voice was deep, with a rough edge that suggested a life spent outdoors, giving orders that were followed without question. No, I don't think so." Evelyn's voice came out shakier than she would have liked. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart still racing beneath her corset. What just happened? Thompson Brothers, the man said, as if that explained everything. He shifted slightly, peering over the top of the trough. Looks like the sheriff's boys got him cornered near the livery. More shouts echoed from down the street. Evelyn tried to rise, but the man's hand shot out, firm on her shoulder. Give it another minute, he said, just to be sure. She should have been offended by his presumption, by the familiar touch of his hand through her dress. A year ago, 6 months ago even, she would have drawn herself up with all the dignity her Philadelphia finishing school had instilled and put this dusty cowboy firmly in his place. But that was before. Before the scandal, before her carefully constructed life had crumbled like ash. So instead she stayed put, acutely aware of how close they were in the confined space behind the trough. He smelled of leather and sage, of horses and open sky, nothing like the cloying cologne the men of her acquaintance wore. You must be Harper's niece, the man said after a moment, still watching the street. We heard you might be coming out to claim the Silver Creek place. Evelyn blinked, surprised. How did you... Small town. He glanced at her and she caught the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. News travels. Plus, you're the only woman I've ever seen step off a stagecoach wearing a dress that costs more than most folks around here make in a month. Heat rushed to her cheeks, part embarrassment, part indignation. I didn't have much time to prepare for... Not a criticism, he interrupted mildly. Just an observation. Wyatt Callahan. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been mocking, if not for the genuine courtesy in his eyes. I own the Double C Ranch, about 5 miles northwest of your uncle's spread. Evelyn Harper. She straightened her shoulders, trying to reclaim some dignity while crouched in the dirt. And I'd appreciate it if you didn't refer to most folks' earnings when discussing my wardrobe choices, Mr. Callahan. This time he did smile, a quick flash of white teeth against sun-bronzed skin. Yes, ma'am. My apologies. A shout from down the street made them both turn. A heavy-set man with a silver star pinned to his vest was waving in all clear. That's Sheriff Davis, Wyatt said, rising to his full height in one fluid motion. He extended a hand to Evelyn. You're safe now. She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. His grip was strong, calloused, and he pulled her to her feet with an ease that suggested considerable strength beneath that dusty shirt. The street was coming back to life around them. Margaret had taken refuge inside the general store and was now peering out anxiously. The stagecoach driver was checking his horses, cursing under his breath, and down by the livery stable, 2 men sat with their hands tied behind their backs while Sheriff Davis stood guard, rifle at the ready. Miss Evelyn? Margaret rushed over, her face flushed with panic. Oh, thank heavens you're unharmed. This dreadful place. We should leave immediately. Go back to... We're not going anywhere, Margaret. Evelyn brushed dust from her skirts with as much dignity as she could muster. This is our home now. Home. Margaret's voice rose an octave. We nearly died before we even set foot. Thompson Brothers haven't hit town in 6 months, Wyatt interjected calmly, retrieving Evelyn's fallen carpetbag. You happened to arrive on an unlucky day. Generally, Sweetwater Ridge is quieter than a church on Monday. Evelyn took the bag from him, their fingers brushing briefly. Generally? Well, that almost smile again. We do have our moments. Sheriff Davis approached, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. He was older than Evelyn had first thought, with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of years under the Wyoming sun. Miss Harper, I presume? He tipped his hat. Bill Davis, town sheriff. Hell of a welcome to Sweetwater Ridge. Are you hurt? No, thanks to Mr. Callahan. Evelyn glanced at Wyatt, who had stepped back slightly, giving her space. Though I confess I'm not accustomed to quite such excitement. Philadelphia, right? Davis chuckled, though his eyes remained kind. Yeah, I imagine this is a far cry from city life. Your uncle spoke of you often. He'd be glad you came, despite the circumstances of your arrival. The mention of her uncle, Uncle Samuel, whom she'd met only twice in her life, but who'd left her his entire ranch in his will, brought a complicated surge of emotions. Guilt that she hadn't known him better. Gratitude for the lifeline he'd thrown her, even from beyond the grave. And underneath it all, a whisper of fear that she was utterly unprepared for what lay ahead. I'm eager to see the property, she said, lifting her chin. If someone could direct me, I'll take you, Wyatt said. It wasn't a question or an offer, really, more a statement of fact. Evelyn bristled slightly at the presumption, but before she could respond, Sheriff Davis was nodding enthusiastically. Good idea, Wyatt. The Silver Creek place is tricky to find if you don't know the territory. Plus, you'll need to stop at Thornton's store for supplies before you head out. He turned to Evelyn. Your uncle's ranch is about 8 miles out. There's a small house, barn, and some outbuildings. Samuel kept a few hands until he got sick last winter, but they've moved on since his passing. 8 miles. A house she'd never seen. A life she couldn't begin to imagine. I see, Evelyn said quietly. And the condition of the property? Davis and Wyatt exchanged a glance that made her stomach tighten. It's manageable, Davis said carefully, with work. What Sheriff Davis means, Wyatt said, his tone direct but not unkind, is that your uncle let things slide these last few months. The house needs repairs. The fences are in poor shape. You've got maybe 30 head of cattle scattered over 160 acres, and no hands to manage them. Evelyn felt Margaret's hand grip her arm, but she kept her gaze steady on Wyatt's face. I see. And you're telling me this to be helpful or to encourage me to sell and go back where I came from? Something flickered in those blue eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or respect? I'm telling you because you deserve to know what you're walking into. What you do with that information is your business. Then I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Callahan. She adjusted her grip on her carpet bag. And I accept your offer to escort us to the property. Margaret and I are quite capable of making our own assessments once we arrive. Wyatt studied her for a long moment, and Evelyn had the unsettling sense that he saw far more than she wanted to reveal. The fear beneath her bravado, the desperation masquerading as determination. My wagon's at the livery, he said finally. I'll load your trunks and be ready to leave in 20 minutes. That'll give you time to get what you need from Thornton's. He touched his hat brim again and walked away, his long strides eating up the dusty street. Evelyn watched him go, feeling oddly off balance. Miss Evelyn, Margaret said urgently, that man, you can't possibly mean to go off alone with... He's our neighbor, Margaret, and unless you plan to walk 8 miles in this heat, I suggest we accept his assistance. Evelyn squared her shoulders. Now, help me make a list of what we'll need. I suspect Philadelphia sensibilities won't serve us much out here. Inside Thornton's general store, Evelyn faced her first real test of frontier life. The proprietor, a balding man with suspicious eyes, looked her up and down before asking bluntly, cash or credit? Cash, Evelyn said, though the word stuck in her throat. She had money, not the fortune she'd grown up with, but enough that Uncle Samuel's lawyer had sent after the will was settled. Still, she knew it had to last. She had no idea when the ranch might actually produce income. What do you recommend for basic household supplies? She asked, refusing to be intimidated by Thornton's skeptical gaze. Depends on what you already got out at Silver Creek. He scratched his chin. Sam wasn't much for keeping house. You'll need flour, sugar, salt, coffee, lamp oil, candles, beans, bacon if you can keep it cool, cornmeal, matches. The list went on, each item another reminder of how unprepared she was. In Philadelphia, she'd never thought about where food came from beyond the market or the household kitchen. Now she was confronted with the stark reality that survival required planning, knowledge, and resources she barely understood. And for the ranch itself? She pressed. What will I need to manage the property? Thornton's expression shifted to something between pity and amusement. Ma'am, managing a cattle ranch ain't something you learn in a general store. You'll need hands. Experienced ones. You'll need to know about grazing patterns, water rights, branding, breeding season. You'll need to ride, rope, work from before dawn till after dark. No offense, but you don't look like you've done a day's physical labor in your life. Evelyn felt the familiar burn of shame and anger in her chest, the same feeling she'd endured through weeks of whispered gossip in Philadelphia. But this was different. Thornton wasn't judging her for breaking her engagement to Richard Ashford or for the scandal that followed. He was simply assessing her capabilities and finding them wanting. Then I'll learn, she said quietly. What's the total? By the time she'd paid for the supplies and stepped back into the June heat, Wyatt was waiting with a sturdy wagon hitched to two large horses. Her trunks, three of them packed with everything she'd deemed essential from her former life, were already loaded in the back. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand to help her up to the seat. Evelyn took it, acutely aware of his strength as he steadied her climb. Margaret was helped up on the other side, her face set in disapproving lines that Evelyn had grown accustomed to ignoring. The ride out of Sweetwater Ridge was quiet at first. Wyatt handled the horses with casual competence, his attention on the rough trail ahead. Evelyn tried not to stare at the landscape, rolling grasslands that seemed to go on forever, punctuated by distant mountains that looked like jagged teeth against the blue sky. "It's bigger than I imagined," she said after a while, breaking the silence. "The land, I mean. It feels endless." "That's because it nearly is," Wyatt replied. "Takes some getting used to coming from back east. The sky, the space. Some folks find it freeing, others find it terrifying. And which did you find it?" He glanced at her, those blue eyes thoughtful. "Both at first, then just home." "You're not from here originally?" "Colorado. Came up to Wyoming territory 10 years ago with nothing but a horse and a bedroll. Built the double C from scratch." He said it matter-of-factly, without pride or false modesty. "Your uncle helped me out in the early days. Let me run some of my cattle on his land when I didn't have enough range of my own. He was a good man, Samuel Harper." Guilt twisted in Evelyn's chest. "I barely knew him. He visited Philadelphia twice when I was a child. I remember him as loud and laughing, so different from my father." "Brothers can be like that," Wyatt said. "Sam mentioned you a few times. He was proud that you could ride and shoot, even if your folks didn't approve." Evelyn's breath caught. "He told you that?" "Last winter, when he was getting sick. Said you had spirit, that you'd been forced into a mold that didn't fit." Wyatt kept his eyes on the trail, but she sensed his attention was fully on her. "Said he hoped you'd find your way out here someday. Guess he made sure you would." Tears pricked at Evelyn's eyes, unexpected and sharp. She blinked them away, unwilling to show such weakness to this stranger. But the thought that Uncle Samuel had known her, truly known her, when her own parents had seen only a reflection of their ambitions. "He left me everything," she said softly. "I don't understand why." "Maybe he figured you needed it more than most." Wyatt's voice was gentle. "Or maybe he saw what you could become, given the chance." They crested a rise, and Wyatt pulled the wagon to a stop. "There," he said, pointing. "Silver Creek Ranch." Evelyn looked, and her heart sank. The house was small, tiny by Philadelphia standards. A single-story structure with a sagging porch, and what looked like missing shingles on the roof. The barn beside it was in better shape, but clearly needed work. Fences ran in haphazard lines across rolling pastures, many sections visibly broken or collapsed. In the distance, she could see a few cattle grazing, but nowhere near the 30 Wyatt had mentioned. It was beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure. "Oh, Miss Evelyn," Margaret whispered, "we can't possibly." "Yes, we can," Evelyn interrupted, though her voice shook slightly. "It's just a house, Margaret. Just land. We'll manage." Wyatt set the wagon moving again, down the gentle slope toward what was now her home. As they drew closer, Evelyn could see more details. The wildflowers growing unchecked around the porch, the stone chimney that looked solid despite the roof's condition, the way Silver Creek itself wound through the property, its water catching the afternoon light. When the wagon stopped in front of the house, Wyatt jumped down and came around to help her descend. This time, when she took his hand, she held on a moment longer than necessary, steadying herself against the wave of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan," she said formally, "for your assistance." "Wyatt," he corrected gently. "And you're welcome, Miss Harper." "Evelyn," she replied, meeting his gaze, "I think we're past formalities, given that you threw me behind a water trough this morning." His smile was quick and genuine. "Fair point." He glanced at the house, then back at her. "I'll help you unload your trunks. Then I should get back to my own place before dark." Together, Wyatt doing most of the heavy lifting while Evelyn and Margaret tried to help, they carried her belongings into the house. Inside, it was sparse but cleaner than she'd feared. A large main room with a stone fireplace, A smaller room that had been Uncle Samuel's bedroom, and a lean-to kitchen with a cast-iron stove that looked like it had seen better days. "The well's out back," Wyatt said, setting down the last trunk. "Water's good. There's a root cellar beneath the kitchen, accessed through that trap door. The barn's got decent loft space for hay storage, though you'll need to stock up before winter." Evelyn nodded, trying to commit everything to memory. "Winter supplies, yes, I'll make a list." Wyatt studied her for a long moment, and she had the sense he was making some kind of decision. "Miss Harper, Evelyn, I'm going to speak plainly because you don't strike me as someone who appreciates being coddled. Please do. This ranch is in rough shape, but it's not beyond saving. You've got good water, decent grazing land, and that creek is reliable year-round, but you can't run it alone. You'll need help, either hired hands or someone to teach you what you need to know. Your uncle's neighbors would have stepped in if it was a man who'd inherited, but I'm a woman, and they don't think I can handle it." Evelyn lifted her chin. "I've been underestimated before, Mr. Callahan. I survived it." "I'm sure you did." His tone was mild, but his eyes were serious. "But this isn't Philadelphia society, where the worst that happens is gossip over tea. Out here, mistakes can be fatal. A broken fence means lost cattle. A missed branding means rustlers steal your herd. A bad decision about winter feed means your stock starves before spring." The blunt words struck her like physical blows, but Evelyn refused to flinch. "Then what do you suggest?" "Let me help you." He said it simply, as if offering to pass the salt at dinner. "I'll come by a few times a week, teach you what you need to know. How to ride properly, mend fences, manage your herd. I won't charge you. Consider it paying back what your uncle did for me." Pride warred with practicality in Evelyn's chest. She wanted to refuse, to prove she could do this alone. But Uncle Samuel's voice echoed in her memory. "You have spirit," and she realized that true spirit meant knowing when to accept help. "I'll pay you," she said firmly. "Not money, because I need to be careful with my funds. But I can cook, and Margaret's an excellent seamstress. We'll trade your knowledge for our skills." Wyatt's eyebrows rose slightly. "You can cook?" "I can learn," she amended. "How hard can it be?" The laugh that burst from him was unexpected, warm and rich. "You really are something, Evelyn Harper." "All right, we have a deal. I'll come by tomorrow morning, early, and I'll take you up on that cooking eventually, once you've figured out how to work that stove without burning the house down." He tipped his hat, that familiar gesture she was already beginning to recognize, and headed for the door. But before he left, he paused and looked back. "Your uncle was right about you," he said quietly. "You've got spirit. That'll count for more out here than all the Philadelphia finishing school manners in the world." Then he was gone, the sound of his wagon fading into the vast Wyoming afternoon. Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching until he disappeared over the rise. Behind her, Margaret was already muttering about mice and missing windows and the impossibility of their situation. But Evelyn barely heard her. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt something beyond shame or fear or desperate determination. She felt possibility. As the sun began its descent toward those distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that she'd never seen in Philadelphia's smoke-hazed twilight, Evelyn Harper made herself a promise. She would learn, she would work, she would prove that Uncle Samuel's faith in her, and perhaps Wyatt Callahan's tentative respect, was not misplaced. This wild, broken, beautiful land would be her redemption. And tomorrow, when Wyatt returned to begin her education in frontier survival, she would be ready, even if she had absolutely no idea what she was getting herself into. The first pale light of dawn found Evelyn awake, standing at the kitchen window with her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee so weak it barely deserved the name. She'd been up for an hour already, having given up on sleep sometime around 4 o'clock when the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, wind rattling loose boards, distant cattle lowing, the cry of some night bird she couldn't name, had finally driven her from bed. Behind her, Margaret still slept in the smaller bedroom, exhausted from their first night in what she'd repeatedly called this God-forsaken wilderness. Evelyn had let her complain, knowing the older woman needed to voice her fears, but now, watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue to that peculiar shade of pearl that preceded sunrise, Evelyn felt something she hadn't expected. peace. It was shattered by the sound of hoofbeats. She set down her coffee and moved to the door, pulling her borrowed robe, one of Uncle Samuel's old shirts actually, tighter around herself. Through the window, she could see Wyatt Callahan riding toward the house on a big bay horse, leading a smaller roan behind him. Panic fluttered in her chest. She wasn't dressed. Her hair hung in a loose braid down her back. She looked nothing like the composed woman who'd arrived yesterday. But this was her ranch now, she reminded herself. And if Wyatt was going to teach her how to survive out here, he'd have to get used to seeing her less than perfectly presented. She opened the door before he could knock. "You're early," she said, trying for confident and landing somewhere near defensive. Wyatt pulled up short, his hand still raised. In the growing light, she could see him more clearly than she had yesterday. The strong line of his jaw, the weathered lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun, the way his shoulders filled out that work shirt without pretension. "Ranchers start early," he said simply. "Sun's wasting. The sun isn't even properly up yet." "Exactly." His mouth quirked in that almost smile she was beginning to recognize. "Can you ride?" Evelyn thought of the gentle mare she'd ridden in Philadelphia's parks, carefully supervised, never faster than a sedate trot. "Yes." "Western saddle, in rough terrain, for hours at a time." Her silence was answer enough. "Thought so." Wyatt swung down from his horse with an easy grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. "Good news is, you're about to learn. Get dressed. Something practical. We're going to check your fences and count your cattle. It'll take most of the day." "I should make breakfast first." "Already ate. Brought you something." He pulled a cloth-wrapped bundle from his saddlebag and handed it to her. "Biscuits and bacon. You can eat while I saddle your uncle's horse. He's in the barn. A gelding named Copper. Steady enough for a beginner." Evelyn took the bundle, too surprised to argue. "You're very organized." "I'm efficient," he corrected. "Out here you have to be. Now go change, unless you plan to ride in your nightclothes." Heat flooded her cheeks as she realized how improper this all was. Standing on her porch in the pre-dawn light, barely dressed, accepting food from a man she'd met only yesterday. But when she looked at Wyatt's face, she saw no impropriety in his expression, only practical purpose. This was the West, she reminded herself. Different rules, different expectations. "Give me 10 minutes, she said. "You've got 5. She was back in 7, wearing her most practical dress, a simple brown cotton she'd brought for gardening, though she'd never actually gardened in Philadelphia. She'd tied her hair back in a severe knot and donned the sturdy boots she'd purchased on the advice of Uncle Samuel's lawyer. Wyatt looked her over with a critical eye. "That'll do for today, but you're going to need proper riding clothes. Divided skirt at minimum, pants, if you can stomach the scandal." "I'm already a scandal back east," Evelyn said quietly. "Pants can hardly make it worse." Something shifted in his expression. Not pity, exactly, but understanding. He didn't ask what she meant, and she was grateful for it. In the barn she met Copper, a sturdy chestnut gelding with kind eyes and a patient demeanor. Wyatt showed her how to saddle him, explaining each step with the same matter-of-fact efficiency he brought to everything. "Blanket first, smooth it out. Any wrinkles will rub him raw on a long ride. Saddle goes on square, not too far forward. Cinch needs to be tight, but check it again after you've ridden a few minutes. Horse will blow himself up when you first saddle him, then relax. That's when the saddle can slip if you're not careful." Evelyn tried to memorize every word, every movement. Her hands fumbled with the unfamiliar buckles and straps, but Wyatt was patient, showing her again when she got it wrong. "Good," he said when she finally finished. "Now mount up. Left foot in the stirrup, grab the horn, swing your right leg over. Try not to kick him in the process." It took her 3 attempts, hampered by her skirts and her own awkwardness, but she finally settled into the saddle. The ground looked much farther away than it had from her Philadelphia mare. "How does it feel?" Wyatt asked, adjusting her stirrups with quick, competent hands. "Terrifying." He laughed, the sound warm in the cool morning air. "Honest, at least. You'll get used to it. Copper's a good teacher, better than I am, probably. He knows his job. Just let him do it and try not to interfere too much." They rode out as the sun finally broke over the distant mountains, painting the grasslands in shades of gold and amber. Evelyn gripped the saddle horn so tightly her knuckles went white, but Copper plodded along with the patience of a saint, seemingly unbothered by his nervous rider. Wyatt rode beside her, pointing out landmarks. That stand of cottonwoods marks your eastern boundary. Silver Creek runs through the middle of your property. You've got good water rights, which matters more than gold out here. Your land extends north to that rocky outcropping, south to where you can just see those fence posts, though the fence itself needs work. How much work? Evelyn asked, trying to see what he was pointing at. Substantial. Probably half the fencing on the property needs repair or replacement. We'll start with the sections closest to the house, work our way out. It's going to take weeks, even with help. Help I can't afford to hire. Help you've got anyway. He said it casually, eyes scanning the horizon. I told you, I owe your uncle. Besides, ranchers help each other out here. It's not charity, it's survival. Come winter, I might need your help with something. That's how it works. They rode in silence for a while, and gradually, Evelyn's death grip on the saddle horn loosened. The rhythm of Copper's gait became almost soothing, and she found herself actually looking at the landscape instead of just trying not to fall off. It was beautiful in a way she'd never experienced. Not the manicured beauty of Philadelphia's parks or the dramatic beauty of paintings she'd seen of the West. This was subtler, the endless roll of grass, the play of light and shadow across the land, the way the wind moved through it all like breathing. There, Wyatt said suddenly, pointing. Your cattle. What's left of them? Evelyn counted maybe 15 head grazing in a small valley. They looked healthy enough, but pitifully few compared to the 30 Wyatt had mentioned. Where are the others? Scattered, lost, stolen, maybe. We'll ride the property over the next few days, see what we can find. Might surprise you. Cattle are good at hiding in draws and coulees, but you're going to need to build your herd back up eventually. How do I do that? Buy more stock or let what you have breed, which means keeping a bull, protecting your calves from predators, making sure you don't lose cattle to disease or rustlers or stupidity. The list felt overwhelming. Evelyn straightened her shoulders. Teach me. And he did. For the next 6 hours, Wyatt Callahan became her professor in the brutal curriculum of ranch life. He showed her how to spot broken fence lines, how to read cattle sign, how to tell healthy stock from sick. He taught her the basics of range management, water rights, and the delicate politics of neighboring ranchers. That land to your west belongs to Marcus Brennan, Wyatt said as they paused to rest the horses near midday. He's got the biggest spread in the county, nearly 5,000 acres, runs about 800 head of cattle. Is he friendly? Wyatt's expression darkened slightly. He's ambitious. Your uncle had some disputes with him over water access. Brennan's been trying to buy Silver Creek for years. He wants the creek itself, gives whoever controls it a lot of power in dry years. I'm not selling. He knows that now. Sent his foreman over yesterday, after word got around that you'd arrived. I told him you weren't interested. Evelyn's head snapped around. You had no right. I had every right as your neighbor and your uncle's friend. Wyatt's voice was mild, but his eyes were steel. Brennan's foreman is a man named Jack Hoskins. He's mean when he drinks and meaner when he doesn't. He had no business approaching a woman alone on her first day. I sent him packing. I can speak for myself, Mr. Callahan. Wyatt, and yes, you can. But out here, sometimes speaking for yourself means backing it up with force. You ready to do that? The memory of yesterday's gunfight flashed through her mind. She thought of the casual violence, the way men had settled their dispute with bullets rather than words. No, she admitted quietly. Not yet. Then let your neighbors help when they offer. It's not weakness, Evelyn. It's wisdom. They ate the lunch Wyatt had brought. More biscuits, some dried beef, and canteens of water from Silver Creek. Evelyn's entire body ached from the unfamiliar hours in the saddle, but she refused to complain. Tell me about your uncle, she said instead, sitting on a flat rock and trying not to wince. What was he really like? Wyatt settled onto the ground nearby, his long legs stretched out. Stubborn, generous, honest to a fault. He came out here 30 years ago with nothing, just like most of us. Built Silver Creek into a decent operation, never got rich but never went hungry either. He loved this land with a fierceness that most folks reserve for people. Why didn't he marry? Have children? He did marry, actually, long time ago. She died in childbirth, the baby too. After that, Wyatt shrugged. Some men remarry, some don't. Sam was one who didn't. He poured everything into this ranch instead. The parallels weren't lost on Evelyn. A man who'd lost his chance at the life he'd planned, who'd rebuilt himself in this wild place. Maybe that's why he'd left it to her, another soul in need of rebuilding. "I won't let it die," she said fiercely. "This ranch, his legacy. I'll find a way to make it work." Wyatt studied her for a long moment. "I believe you might actually mean that." "I do." "Then we'd better get back to work. You've got fence to learn how to mend." The afternoon was brutal. Wyatt showed her how to dig post holes in the rocky soil, how to string wire without slicing her hands open, how to use the tension of the wire itself to keep the fence taut. Her back screamed. Her hands blistered despite the work gloves he'd brought. Sweat soaked through her dress, and her hair escaped its pins to hang in damp tendrils around her face. "Take a break," Wyatt said finally, after she'd driven the same fence staple crooked for the third time. "I can do this. I know you can, but you're exhausted, and exhausted people make mistakes. Out here, mistakes cost you." He handed her his canteen. "Drink. Rest. You've done more today than most greenhorns manage in a week." Evelyn sank down in the shade of the fence line, too tired to maintain her pride. "How long until I stop being a greenhorn?" "Year, maybe. 2 if you're stubborn about it." "I'm very stubborn. I've noticed." He settled beside her, pulling off his hat to wipe his brow. "Can I ask you something?" She tensed, knowing what was coming. "You want to know why I left Philadelphia?" "Only if you want to tell me, but I heard things. Talk travels, even out here. Something about a broken engagement." Evelyn took a long drink from the canteen, buying time. She could refuse to answer. She could deflect. She could maintain the careful silence she'd cultivated for months. But something about this man, this place, this vast sky that seemed to dwarf all her carefully guarded secrets made her want to tell the truth. "His name was Richard Ashford," she began quietly. "Son of one of Philadelphia's wealthiest families. My parents were thrilled when he proposed. It was everything they'd raised me for, the perfect marriage to secure our family's position in society. But he had a mistress. Several, actually. I didn't know until 2 months before the wedding when I found letters. Love letters, from a woman he'd been seeing for years. When I confronted him, he laughed, said it was normal, that all men had such arrangements, that I was naive to expect otherwise." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "What did you do?" "I broke the engagement, publicly. At the engagement ball my parents had spent a fortune hosting. In front of 300 guests, I announced exactly why I was calling it off." "Hell!" "Yes," Evelyn smiled bitterly. "Hell is an apt description. The scandal was spectacular. Richard's family claimed I was lying, that I'd broken under the pressure of the upcoming wedding. My own parents begged me to recant, to apologize, to salvage the match. When I refused, they essentially disowned me. Not legally, but in every way that mattered." "That takes courage," Wyatt said quietly. "The kind most people don't have." "Or stupidity. I destroyed my own life over a principle." "No, you chose honesty over comfort. That's not stupidity." He looked at her with those steady blue eyes. "Your uncle would have been proud." The unexpected kindness made her throat tight. "The irony is, I didn't even love Richard. I don't think I knew what love was. Real love, not the polite affection that society called love. I just couldn't bear the lie of it all, the pretending, the acceptance of something fundamentally wrong." "So you came here?" "So I came here. Because Uncle Samuel left me a way out, and because staying in Philadelphia meant either apologizing for telling the truth or living as a social pariah forever. And now you're a rancher in Wyoming territory, learning to string fence wire and herd cattle." There was no mockery in Wyatt's voice, only a kind of wonder. "Life is strange." "Life is impossible," Evelyn corrected, "but I'm discovering I prefer impossible to false." They rode back as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in those magnificent colors that still took Evelyn's breath away. She was so exhausted she could barely stay in the saddle, but she'd learned more in one day than she'd learned in years of Philadelphia finishing school. Back at the ranch, Wyatt helped her unsaddle Copper and showed her how to properly groom and feed a horse. Margaret appeared on the porch, her expression a mixture of relief and disapproval. Miss Evelyn, you're filthy, and you've been alone with that man all day. Learning to run a ranch, Margaret. Evelyn was too tired to be diplomatic, which is what I'll be doing every day from now on. You can either accept it or take the next stage back to Philadelphia. Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Wyatt diplomatically excused himself, claiming he needed to get back to his own ranch before full dark. Same time tomorrow? He asked Evelyn quietly. Earlier, if you're willing. I have a lot to learn. He smiled, a real smile this time, not just that almost expression. You're going to make it, Evelyn Harper. I wasn't sure yesterday, but I am now. What changed your mind? You didn't quit. Most people would have quit by noon. He swung up onto his horse. Get some rest. Tomorrow we're working with cattle, and they're less forgiving than fence posts. After he left, Evelyn stood in the yard watching the dust settle, feeling the ache in every muscle and the strange satisfaction of having survived her first full day as a rancher. This is madness, Margaret said from the porch. Yes, Evelyn agreed, but it's my madness. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was brutal and beautiful in equal measure. Wyatt arrived each morning before dawn, and together they worked until the sun hung low. Evelyn learned to rope, badly at first, missing cattle by yards and once managing to lasso a fence post while Wyatt tried manfully not to laugh. She learned to read the sky for weather, to spot a lame cow from 100 yards, to anticipate trouble before it arrived. Ranching is 90% preventing disasters and 10% dealing with them anyway, Wyatt told her one afternoon as they drove a small group of cattle toward better grazing. You never get ahead of the work, you just keep it from burying you. On the 5th day, Evelyn attempted to cook her first proper meal in the ranch kitchen. It was a disaster. The biscuits came out hard as rocks, the bacon burned, and she somehow managed to produce coffee that Wyatt described diplomatically as interesting. I can't even do this, she said, staring at the wreckage of breakfast. How am I supposed to run a ranch if I can't manage basic cooking? You learn, Wyatt said simply, forcing down another bite of charred bacon. Same as everything else. Your uncle couldn't cook worth a damn when he first came out here either. By the end, he made the best sourdough bread in the county. How long did that take him? About 10 years? Despite herself, Evelyn laughed. It felt good, that laughter. She couldn't remember the last time she'd found genuine humor in her own failures. I'll do better tomorrow, she promised. I know you will. And she did, marginally. Each day brought tiny improvements. Biscuits that were only slightly hard, coffee that was merely bad instead of terrible. Margaret, thawing slightly in the face of Evelyn's determination, began to offer tentative cooking advice. The older woman had spent years managing a household kitchen. She knew more than she'd been letting on. By the second week, Evelyn could saddle copper without help, could mend a fence line without mangling the wire, could even throw a rope with something approaching accuracy. Her hands were covered in calluses. Her face had tanned despite her best efforts to wear a bonnet, and her muscles had stopped screaming and settled into a constant, manageable ache. You're getting good at this, Wyatt observed one afternoon as they rode the northern boundary. Natural talent, maybe. Or desperation, Evelyn suggested. I don't have the luxury of being bad at it. There's that too. They'd become comfortable with each other's silences, she realized. They could ride for an hour without speaking, and it felt companionable rather than awkward. And when they did talk, the conversations ranged from practical matters of ranch management to deeper discussions about life, choices, regrets. Do you ever miss Colorado? She asked him once. Sometimes, but missing a place doesn't mean you belong there anymore. He looked at her curiously. Do you miss Philadelphia? Evelyn considered the question honestly. I miss certainty. I miss knowing what each day would bring, even if I hated what it brought. Out here, I never know what's going to happen. It's terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. That's the West for you. Nothing's guaranteed except that it'll surprise you. The surprise came on a Thursday afternoon in late June when Marcus Brennan himself rode up to Silver Creek Ranch with 4 of his men. Evelyn was in the yard, practicing her roping on a fence post when they arrived. She recognized Brennan immediately from Wyatt's description, a big man in his 50s with silver-shot hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way. Miss Harper, he said, touching his hat with exaggerated courtesy. Marcus Brennan, I own the Broken Bee to your west. Thought I'd pay my respects, seeing as we're neighbors. Mr. Brennan, Evelyn kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. Margaret was in the house, too far away to help. Wyatt was at his own ranch. She was alone with 5 strange men, miles from the nearest town. Fine property you've got here, Brennan continued, his eyes sweeping the ranch with an assessing gaze that made Evelyn's skin crawl. Your uncle and I had some differences over the years, but I always respected his operation. What can I do for you, Mr. Brennan? Direct. I like that. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'll be equally direct. I'd like to buy your ranch. I'll offer you a fair price, more than fair, actually, enough for you to set yourself up nicely back east. Live comfortably. I'm not interested in selling. Now, Miss Harper, let's be reasonable. You're what, 3 weeks into trying to run this place? You're a young woman with no experience, no help, no husband to manage the heavy work. Silver Creek's been struggling for 2 years, even with your uncle running it. What makes you think you can succeed where he barely managed? The words stung because they echoed her own doubts. But Evelyn had faced down Philadelphia society at its cruelest. She knew how to hide fear behind a cool facade. My circumstances are my own concern, Mr. Brennan. As I said, I'm not selling. Good day. She turned away, dismissing him as she would a tiresome suitor at a ball. It was a calculated risk. Men like Brennan didn't respond well to being dismissed by women. You're making a mistake, Brennan said, his voice hardening. This land is wasted on someone who doesn't know how to use it. Your uncle understood that eventually. He was going to sell to me before he died. Evelyn spun back. That's a lie. Is it? Ask around town. We'd been negotiating for months. Then why did he leave it to me instead of selling to you? Brennan's face darkened. That's what I'd like to know. But it doesn't matter. You'll fail, and when you do, I'll be here to buy the pieces. Might as well save yourself the trouble and sell now while you can still get a decent price. Get off my property. Now, Miss Harper, I said get off my property, or I'll demonstrate that while I may not know much about ranching yet, I know plenty about shooting. My uncle taught me when I was 12. It was a bluff. She hadn't touched a gun in years and wasn't even sure where Uncle Samuel kept his rifle. But something in her voice, or perhaps in her eyes, made Brennan believe her. He studied her for a long moment, then laughed, a cold sound. You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit doesn't keep a ranch running through winter. When you change your mind, and you will, you know where to find me. He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following. Evelyn stood rigid until they disappeared over the rise, then her legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the porch steps. Margaret came rushing out. What did he want? My ranch. Evelyn's hands were shaking. He wants Silver Creek. Well, you'll sell to him, won't you? Miss Evelyn, this is the answer to our prayers. We can go back to civilization, start over somewhere proper. I'm not selling. But you heard him. You can't manage this place. It's too much for one woman. Then I'll find a way to manage it anyway. Evelyn stood, her fear transmuting into fury. I will not be bullied off land that's rightfully mine by some pompous rancher who thinks women are too weak to own property. I've already run from one powerful man who tried to control me. I won't do it again. This isn't about pride, Miss Evelyn. It's about everything. Evelyn's voice broke. Don't you see? If I give up now, if I sell and run back east, then Richard wins. My parents win. Everyone who said I was making a mistake wins. This ranch is all I have left of myself. I can't lose it. Margaret's expression softened. Oh, child. I'm going to make this work, Evelyn whispered. Somehow. When Wyatt arrived the next morning, she told him about Brennan's visit. His face went hard. He had no right. He had every right to make an offer. I had every right to refuse. Did he threaten you? Evelyn hesitated. Not explicitly, but the implication was clear. He expects me to fail. Then we make sure you don't. Wyatt's voice was firm. Starting today, we double your pace. You need to be competent enough to hire proper hands by fall, skilled enough that they'll respect your authority despite your being a woman. Can I do that in 4 months? You can try. He smiled slightly. Besides, you've got something most greenhorns don't. What's that? Motivation. Brennan just gave you a reason to succeed beyond just survival. Now you want to prove him wrong. That's powerful fuel. He was right. Over the following weeks, Evelyn threw herself into learning with renewed intensity. She worked until her body screamed for rest, then worked some more. She studied the cattle, learning to recognize each one individually, to spot signs of illness or injury. She rode the property in all weathers, memorizing every draw and creek bend and hidden valley. And somewhere in those long days, something shifted between her and Wyatt. The careful distance they'd maintained began to erode. She noticed the way his hands gentled when teaching her a difficult skill. He noticed the way she'd started meeting his eyes instead of looking away. One evening, as they sat on the porch after a particularly grueling day, Wyatt asked, "Why did you really refuse to marry Richard Ashford? And don't say it was just principle." Evelyn was quiet for a long time. "Because I didn't want to spend my life with someone who saw me as a decoration, an accessory to enhance his status. He never asked what I thought, what I wanted, what I dreamed about. And when I tried to tell him, he patted my hand and changed the subject, like I was a child playing at having opinions." "You wanted to be seen," Wyatt said softly. "Yes, but..." The simple acknowledgement brought tears to her eyes. "Is that so much to ask, to be seen as a whole person?" "No, it's the least you deserve." He stood, preparing to leave. But at the porch steps, he paused. "For what it's worth, Evelyn Harper, I see you. And what I see is remarkable." Then he was gone, riding off into the gathering dusk, leaving Evelyn sitting alone with her heart pounding and her world shifted somehow, irrevocably changed by words she'd been waiting her whole life to hear. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She lay in the darkness of her uncle's bedroom, her bedroom now, replaying Wyatt's words over and over. "I see you. And what I see is remarkable." No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Not her parents, who had seen only a useful marriage alliance. Not Richard, who had seen only a pretty ornament for his arm. Not even Uncle Samuel, though she suspected he might have, given time. When dawn finally broke, she rose with gritty eyes and a restless energy that demanded action. She was outside before Wyatt arrived, already attempting to saddle Copper on her own. Her hands fumbled with the cinch, and she was cursing under her breath when she heard his familiar footsteps behind her. "Let me," he said quietly. "I can do it myself." "I know you can." But his hands were already there, checking her work, tightening the cinch properly. "Doesn't mean you have to." Their fingers brushed as she reached for the reins, and the contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with static. She pulled back quickly, confused by the intensity of her own reaction. "What are we doing today?" she asked, her voice coming out more sharply than intended. If Wyatt noticed her tone, he didn't show it. "Branding. I brought 6 of my calves over. They need marking before fall roundup. You need to learn how it's done." "Won't that hurt them?" "Yes, but it's necessary. Out here, an unbranded calf is free range. Anyone can claim it. You mark your stock, or you lose it." He paused. "If you can't stomach it, say so now. No shame in that." Evelyn thought of the casual cruelties she'd witnessed in Philadelphia. The way her mother had dismissed servants without references for minor infractions. The way Richard had spoken about the poor as if they were less than human. The way society had shredded reputations for entertainment. She'd learned to stomach plenty of things that turned her stomach. "Show me how it's done." The process was brutal and efficient. Wyatt built the fire, heated the branding iron until it glowed orange. Then he roped a calf with practiced ease, brought it down, and held it while the iron pressed against its hide. The smell of burning hair and flesh made Evelyn's stomach turn, but she forced herself to watch, to learn. "Your turn," Wyatt said after the 3rd calf. "I can't rope like you can." "Then we'll pen them first, make it easier. But you need to do this yourself, Evelyn. Your hands will be watching. If you can't manage the hard parts, they won't respect you." She knew he was right. She'd been thinking about hiring help for weeks now, putting it off because she wasn't sure she was ready. But fall was coming, and with it the hard work of preparing for winter. She couldn't do it alone. The calf fought when she approached it in the pen. Wyatt talked her through it, how to position herself, how to use the animal's own weight against it, how to hold it down despite its struggles. Her muscles screamed, the calf bawled, and when she finally pressed the heated iron against its flank, holding it steady for the count of 3 that Wyatt called out, she felt something inside her shift. This was real. This was survival stripped of all pretense. There was no room here for the delicate sensibilities of Philadelphia drawing rooms. "Good," Wyatt said when she released the calf, and it scrambled away to its mother. 2 more to go. By the time they finished, Evelyn was covered in dirt and sweat, her arms shaking with exhaustion. But she'd done it. Every calf bore the Silver Creek brand, a simple SC inside a circle that her uncle had registered years ago. "How do you feel?" Wyatt asked, banking the fire. "Like I just wrestled 6 calves." He laughed. "That's about right. Come on, let's get water. You've earned it." They walked to the creek in silence, the late morning sun beating down mercilessly. Evelyn knelt on the bank and splashed water on her face, not caring that she was ruining what was left of her appearance. When she looked up, she found Wyatt watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" "You're different than when you arrived," he said slowly. "Stronger, more sure of yourself." "Or more desperate," she countered, sitting back on her heels. "I'm not sure there's much difference out here." "There is." He crouched beside her, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair at his temples. "Desperation makes you reckless. Strength makes you capable. You're becoming capable, Evelyn." The way he said her name made her breath catch. She should stand, put distance between them, remember the propriety that had been drilled into her since childhood. But she didn't want to. For the first time in her life, she wanted to lean into the moment instead of away from it. "Wyatt!" "I know I shouldn't," he interrupted, his voice rough. "You're still getting established here. You need a teacher, not whatever this is, but I can't stop thinking about you, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise." Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't want you to pretend." The space between them seemed to evaporate. His hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she didn't. When his calloused fingers touched her cheek, she leaned into the contact like a woman starving for gentleness. "This is a bad idea," Wyatt murmured, even as he drew closer. "Most of my good ideas led me to misery," Evelyn whispered. "Maybe it's time to try bad ones." The kiss was nothing like the chaste pecks Richard had bestowed on her during their engagement. This was heat and hunger, a claiming and a question all at once. Wyatt's hand slid into her hair, scattering pins, and she gripped his shirt like an anchor in a storm. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn felt dizzy with the enormity of what had just happened. "We should talk about this," Wyatt said, though he didn't release her. "Should we?" Evelyn found herself smiling despite the chaos in her chest. "What would we say? That this is improper? I stopped caring about propriety when I left Philadelphia. That it's too fast? I've spent 8 weeks learning to trust you with my life. Why not my heart?" "Because hearts are harder to mend than rope burns." But his thumb was tracing her jawline with devastating tenderness. "I don't want to be another man who hurts you, Evelyn." "Then don't be." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "Don't make promises you can't keep. Don't pretend to be something you're not. Just be honest with me. That's all I ask." "I can do that." He stood, offering his hand to pull her up. "Honestly, then, I've been half in love with you since you stood in that dusty street refusing to be cowed by Brennan's threats. Watching you work these past weeks, seeing you refuse to quit no matter how hard it gets, I'm all the way in love now, and I don't know what to do about it." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they felt like coming home. "We could start with more of what just happened," she suggested, feeling bold and reckless and alive. Wyatt's laugh was surprised and genuine. "You're going to be the death of me, Evelyn Harper." "I certainly hope not. I'd hate to have to learn ranching from someone else." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and if Margaret noticed the scattered hairpins or the flush on Evelyn's cheeks, she had the wisdom not to comment. Over the following weeks, something profound shifted between them. The work continued, fencing, cattle management, the endless tasks of keeping a ranch running, but now it was punctuated by stolen kisses behind the barn, quiet conversations on the porch, as stars filled the impossible sky, moments of connection that went deeper than words. "Tell me about your family," Evelyn said one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. "Not much to tell. Parents died when I was 16. Fever took them both within a week. I had a younger sister, Mary. She was 12. What happened to her? Married a shopkeeper in Denver 5 years ago. Has 3 kids now. She writes sometimes, asks me to visit, but he shrugged. This is my life. I can't imagine leaving it, even for family. Do you want children of your own? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither had directly addressed. Wyatt turned to look at her, his expression serious. I want a life that matters, he said slowly. I want to build something that lasts, whether that's land or family or both. But I'm 34 years old, Evelyn. I've spent the last 10 years married to my ranch. I'm not an easy man to live with. I'm up before dawn. I work until I can barely stand. I forget to come in for meals when there's work to be done. Is this your way of warning me off? This is my way of being honest, like you asked. He reached for her hand. I'm not a Philadelphia gentleman. I can't give you ballrooms and fancy dresses and a life of leisure. What I can give you is partnership, respect, a future built together, if you want it. Evelyn's throat tightened. And if I said I wanted it? Then I'd ask you to marry me properly, in front of witnesses, with all the ceremony you deserve. But first, I need to know you're sure. You've been here less than 3 months. That's not enough time to— It's enough time to know who you are, she interrupted. It's enough time to know how I feel when I'm with you. Safe, seen, valued for who I am, not what I represent. You're sure? Instead of answering, Evelyn leaned in and kissed him, pouring everything she couldn't articulate into the contact. When she pulled back, Wyatt's eyes were dark with emotion. I'll take that as a yes, he murmured. Take it as a promise, she corrected. I'm not going anywhere, Wyatt Callahan. You're stuck with me. Best news I've heard in years. But their moment of peace was short-lived. The next morning, Evelyn woke to find 3 of her cattle dead in the north pasture, their throats cut. Wyatt arrived to find her standing over the carcasses, her face white with shock and fury. He dismounted quickly, examining the carnage with grim expertise. This wasn't predators, he said quietly. This was deliberate. Brennan. Maybe, or maybe someone he hired to send a message. Wyatt straightened, his jaw tight. You need to report this to Sheriff Davis. What good will that do? We have no proof it was Brennan. Even if we did, he's the most powerful rancher in the county. Who would believe us? I believe you, and I'm not without influence myself. Wyatt's hand found hers, squeezed hard. But more than that, you need this documented. If Brennan's escalating, we need a record of it. They rode to Sweetwater Ridge together, Evelyn pushing down her fear to maintain an appearance of calm. Sheriff Davis listened to their report with a troubled expression. I'll ride out to Brennan's place, ask some questions, he said. But Miss Harper, without witnesses or evidence tying him to the crime, there's not much I can do legally. Best I can offer is a warning that you're under my protection. That's not enough, Evelyn said flatly. No, it's not. But it's what I got. Davis sighed. Look, I'll be honest with you. Brennan's been wanting Silver Creek for years. He's got the money and influence to make life difficult for anyone who stands in his way. Your best option might be to sell. I'm not selling my land because some bully killed 3 cows. Then you need to be prepared for worse. Brennan doesn't strike me as the type to give up easy. Outside the sheriff's office, Evelyn stood on the boardwalk trying to steady her shaking hands. 3 dead cattle represented a significant loss. She couldn't afford many more. We'll replace them, Wyatt said quietly. I've got extra stock. Consider it a wedding gift. Evelyn turned to stare at him. You haven't actually, haven't I? He smiled slightly. Because I'm fairly certain I asked you to marry me last night, and you said yes, unless I misunderstood that kiss. Despite everything, Evelyn felt laughter bubble up in her chest. You asked me to marry you in the middle of a conversation about dead cattle and Marcus Brennan. That's possibly the least romantic proposal in history. You want romance? Wyatt took her hand right there on the main street of Sweetwater Ridge where anyone could see. Evelyn Harper, you're the most stubborn, determined, courageous woman I've ever met. You make me want to be better than I am. You make me believe that building a life together is possible, even when everything else feels uncertain. Will you marry me? Yes. The word came out steady and sure. Yes, I'll marry you. Soon? As soon as we can arrange it. Wyatt pulled her close, heedless of the scandalized looks from the handful of townspeople on the street. "Before winter," he said firmly. "I want you legally protected before the hard months come. If Brennan's going to make trouble, it'll be easier to fight him if we're united." Evelyn knew he was right. As a married woman, she'd have more legal standing. As Wyatt's wife, she'd have the protection of his reputation and resources. But more than that, she simply wanted to be his wife, wanted the partnership he offered, the future they could build together. They were married 3 weeks later, on a crisp September morning when the aspens had turned gold and the air held the first hint of coming cold. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church in Sweetwater Ridge, with Margaret weeping happy tears and Sheriff Davis standing as witness alongside Wyatt's foreman from the Double C. Evelyn wore a dress she'd had made in town, plain blue calico, nothing like the elaborate gown her mother had commissioned for her wedding to Richard. But when Wyatt looked at her with those steady blue eyes and spoke his vows in that deep, certain voice, she felt more beautiful than she ever had in silk and pearls. "I promise to stand beside you," he said, holding both her hands in his. "In good years and bad, in prosperity and hardship. I promise to see you as you are, not as I wish you to be. I promise to build a life worthy of the trust you're placing in me." Evelyn's own vows came from her heart rather than any book. "I promise to match your strength with my own, to be your partner in all things, to never stop fighting for what we're building together, and to love you with the same honesty you've shown me from the first day we met." When the minister pronounced them married, Wyatt kissed her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. This was real. This was hers. Not a bargain struck between families, but a choice made freely by two people who'd found each other in the vast Wyoming wilderness. The celebration afterward was modest. Dinner at the hotel dining room, attended by the few people in Sweetwater Ridge who'd become their friends. But Evelyn felt rich beyond measure, sitting beside her husband, planning their future together. "We should combine the ranches," Wyatt said over coffee. "Run them as one operation. It'll be more efficient, and it'll make it harder for Brennan to target either property." "What would we call it?" "Whatever you want. It's your land, too, now." Evelyn considered. "Double Creek. The Double C and Silver Creek together." Wyatt smiled. "I like it. Double Creek Ranch it is." But the warmth of their wedding day couldn't quite dispel Evelyn's growing nervousness as evening approached. She'd been married before, or nearly so, but had never progressed beyond chaste kisses with Richard. The physical reality of marriage loomed ahead of her like uncharted territory. They rode back to Silver Creek as the sun set, Wyatt driving the wagon in comfortable silence. When they arrived, Margaret had thoughtfully made herself scarce, staying in town at the hotel for the night. The house was quiet, lit only by the lamps Evelyn had left burning. Inside, Evelyn felt suddenly, awkwardly aware that she had no idea what to do next. All her Philadelphia training had prepared her for managing a household, not for the intimacy of marriage. "I've never—" she started, then stopped, feeling heat flood her face. Wyatt turned from where he'd been stoking the fire. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Neither have I," he said quietly. "Not like this. Not with someone who matters." "Really? Really?" He crossed to her, taking her hands gently. "Evelyn, we don't have to do anything tonight. We can just sleep if that's what you need." She looked up at him, this man who'd taught her to ride, to rope, to survive, who'd kissed her beside Silver Creek and promised her partnership, who'd stood before witnesses and vowed to see her as she truly was. "I've never shared a bed," she whispered, voicing her deepest fear. "I don't know how to be—" "What you need." Wyatt's smile was gentle. "Then tonight you'll share my heart too. We'll figure out the rest together, same as we figured out everything else. No rush, no expectations, just us." His words unlocked something inside her, all the fear she'd been carrying, all the worry about not being enough. With Richard, she would have been expected to perform, to be perfect, to meet standards she'd never fully understood. But Wyatt was offering something different, space to learn, permission to be uncertain. "I trust you," she said simply. "I know." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And I trust you. That's worth more than experience." What followed was tender and awkward and beautiful in equal measure. Wyatt was patient, gentle, taking his time despite his own obvious desire. He asked permission with every touch, paid attention to her responses, made her feel cherished rather than used. And when nervousness gave way to something deeper, when fear transformed into connection, Evelyn understood why people wrote poetry about this. It wasn't the mechanical joining she'd heard whispered about in Philadelphia drawing rooms. It was vulnerability and trust, giving and receiving, two people learning the language of each other's bodies. Afterward, lying in Wyatt's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Evelyn felt completely, utterly at peace. "You all right?" Wyatt asked quietly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "More than all right." She tilted her head to look at him. "I was so afraid, not of you, but of failing somehow, of not knowing what to do." "You didn't fail?" He kissed her forehead. "And even if it had been terrible, we would have figured it out eventually. That's what marriage is, figuring things out together." "Is it always like this?" "I don't know, but I intend to find out." His smile was warm in the lamplight. "We've got the rest of our lives to practice." Evelyn laughed, feeling light and free in a way she'd never experienced before. "Best idea you've had yet, Mr. Callahan." "Mrs. Callahan," he corrected softly. "You're Mrs. Callahan now." The name settled over her like a benediction. Not Evelyn Harper, disappointment to her family. Not Evelyn Harper, scandal of Philadelphia. But Evelyn Callahan, rancher's wife, partner in building a life from Wyoming dirt and determination. "Yes," she murmured, letting her eyes drift closed. "I am." They slept tangled together, and when Evelyn woke in the early morning darkness, she found Wyatt already awake beside her, watching her with an expression of such tenderness it made her throat tight. "What are you thinking?" she whispered. "That I'm the luckiest man in Wyoming territory." He pulled her closer. "And that we should probably get up soon. Cattle don't care that we just got married." 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes, he agreed. But those minutes stretched into 10, then 20, stolen moments of intimacy before the demands of the day intruded. When they finally rose and dressed, moving around each other in the small bedroom with new familiarity, Evelyn felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was what she'd left Philadelphia to find. Not escape, but belonging. Not running away, but running toward. A life built on honest work and honest love, under a sky so vast it made everything else seem small and manageable. They were eating breakfast. Evelyn's biscuits had actually turned out edible this time when they heard horses approaching. Wyatt tensed immediately, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle he kept by the door. But it wasn't Brennan or his men. It was Sheriff Davis, riding fast, his face grim. "We've got trouble," he said without preamble when Wyatt opened the door. "Fire at the Double C. Your barn's gone, Wyatt." Someone said it deliberately. Evelyn watched the color drain from her husband's face. The Double C was his life's work, 10 years of building from nothing, and now someone had struck at the heart of it. "How bad?" Wyatt's voice was deadly calm. "Bad enough. Lost some equipment, winter feed. Could have been worse. Your foreman got the horses out before it spread." Davis glanced at Evelyn. "This happened last night, right around when folks knew you two were here at Silver Creek. Someone knew you'd be away from your place." "Brennan," Evelyn said flatly. "Can't prove it. But yeah, that'd be my guess too." Davis sighed heavily. "Wyatt, I'm sorry. I know this is your wedding night and all, but I'm coming." Wyatt was already grabbing his hat, his gun belt. He turned to Evelyn, conflict clear on his face. "I have to—" "Go," she said firmly, though her heart was racing. "Your ranch needs you. I'll be fine here. Take the rifle. Don't open the door for anyone but me or the sheriff." He kissed her quickly, hard. "I'll be back as soon as I can." Then he was gone, leaving Evelyn alone in the house with the taste of fear bitter on her tongue. She spent the day in a state of heightened alertness, the rifle propped near the door, her ears straining for any sound of approaching riders. Margaret returned from town around noon, full of concern, but Evelyn sent her to work in the garden, anything to keep busy, to keep from imagining worst-case scenarios. Wyatt didn't return until dusk, looking exhausted and furious. Evelyn ran to meet him as he dismounted. "How bad?" "Bad. Lost half my winter feed, some tack, tools I've been using for years." His jaw was tight. "But we're alive, and that's what matters. This was meant to be a warning." "A warning of what?" That Brennan can reach us anytime he wants. That marriage or no marriage, we're vulnerable. Wyatt pulled her close, and she felt the tremor in his arms. I won't let him hurt you, Evelyn. Whatever it takes. She corrected firmly. We won't let him hurt us. This is my fight too now, Wyatt. Your ranch, my ranch. They're the same thing. We stand together. He looked down at her, and something in his expression shifted from fear to determination. Together, he agreed, whatever comes. But as they stood there in the gathering darkness, both knew that whatever came would likely be worse than anything they'd faced yet. Brennan had declared war, and they'd just lost the first battle. The war Brennan had started didn't escalate immediately. Instead, it simmered like a pot about to boil over, making the waiting almost worse than action would have been. Evelyn and Wyatt worked Double Creek Ranch with rifles always within reach, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon for trouble that could come at any moment. We need more hands, Wyatt said one morning in late September as they surveyed the combined herds. Not just for the work, but for protection. More eyes watching. Can we afford it? Evelyn asked, though she already knew the answer. The fire had cost them dearly, and her own funds were dwindling faster than she'd anticipated. Can we afford not to? Wyatt countered. Winter's coming. We need to get the cattle moved to lower pastures, finish repairs on both properties, stock enough feed and supplies to last until spring. And we need to do it while watching our backs. They hired 3 men in town the next day, experienced ranch hands who'd heard about the trouble and come looking for work anyway. Tom Hastings was oldest, a weathered cowboy in his 50s who'd worked spreads from Texas to Montana. The younger two, brothers named Jack and Samuel Morrison, were green but willing to learn. You know what you're getting into here? Wyatt asked them bluntly as they stood in the yard at Silver Creek. This ranch has a target on it. Marcus Brennan wants this land, and he's not above violence to get it. Tom spat tobacco juice and shrugged. Worked for worse bosses and dealt with worse trouble. At least you're honest about it. We can't pay top wages, Evelyn added. Not yet, but we'll feed you well, give you fair treatment, and a share of spring profits if we make any. That's more than most offer, ma'am, Jack Morrison said, his young face earnest. We'll pull our weight. Having the extra hands changed everything. Suddenly, work that had taken Evelyn and Wyatt days could be accomplished in hours. Fences went up faster, cattle were moved efficiently. And perhaps most importantly, there were always at least 2 people on the ranch, making it harder for Brennan to strike without witnesses. But the help came with complications Evelyn hadn't anticipated. Tom was respectful enough, but she could see the skepticism in his eyes when she gave orders. The Morrison brothers were worse. They looked to Wyatt for confirmation every time she spoke, as if her words held no weight without her husband's backing. They don't respect me, she said to Wyatt one night as they lay in bed, frustration making her voice sharp. I could tell them the sky was blue and they'd wait for you to agree before believing it. Give them time, Wyatt said, though his tone suggested he'd noticed the same thing. They're not used to taking orders from a woman. Hell, most men out here aren't. I'm not most women. No, you're not. He pulled her closer. Show them what you can do. They'll come around. She tried. Over the following weeks, Evelyn pushed herself harder than ever, determined to prove her competence. She took the roughest jobs, the dirtiest work, anything to demonstrate she wasn't some delicate eastern flower playing at ranching. She rode fence lines in freezing rain, helped wrestle bulls during dehorning, spent 12-hour days in the saddle without complaint. Slowly, grudgingly, the hands began to show her respect. Tom was first, after she successfully delivered a breech calf while the men stood by helplessly. The Morrison brothers came around when she outshot both of them during target practice, her childhood lessons from Uncle Samuel finally proving useful. You're all right, Mrs. Callahan, Tom said gruffly one evening after she'd worked alongside them repairing storm damage. For a greenhorn. It was the highest compliment he'd ever paid her. But respect from her own hands didn't protect them from Brennan's harassment. Cattle went missing in small numbers, never enough to justify a major confrontation, but enough to hurt. Fences were cut in remote sections, equipment disappeared, and always there was the sense of being watched, of unseen eyes tracking their movements. He's trying to bleed us dry, Wyatt said grimly after they discovered another broken fence. Death by 1,000 cuts instead of one killing blow. Then we stopped the bleeding. Evelyn's jaw was set. We ride to his ranch and confront him directly. That's exactly what he wants. Give him an excuse to claim we're the aggressors. So we do nothing? We're strategic. Wyatt's eyes were hard. Sheriff Davis can't help without evidence, but there are other ways to fight back. Brennan's not the only powerful rancher in the county. If we can get the others on our side. He was right. Over the next week, they visited neighboring ranches, carefully building alliances. Some ranchers were sympathetic. They dealt with Brennan's bullying themselves. Others were non-committal, unwilling to take sides in what they saw as a losing battle. But a few, like old Martin Schaefer, whose land bordered both Double Creek and Brennan's Broken Bee, proved valuable allies. Brennan's been trying to push me out for years, Martin said, pouring coffee in his kitchen while his wife served thick slices of apple pie. But I'm too stubborn to leave and too established for him to intimidate. If you two can stand up to him, others might find their courage too. We're not looking to start a range war, Wyatt said carefully. War's already started, son. Brennan started it. Question is whether you're going to fight back or roll over. Martin fixed Evelyn with a shrewd look. Your uncle wouldn't have rolled over. I'm guessing you won't either. No, Evelyn said firmly. I won't. October came with the first hard frost, turning the grasslands golden brown and reminding them that winter was approaching fast. They worked brutal hours, racing against the weather to finish preparations. Evelyn fell into bed each night too exhausted to think, only to wake before dawn and start again. It was during one of those endless workdays that she first felt it, a wave of nausea so sudden and intense it doubled her over in the barn. You all right? Tom called from where he was stacking hay. Fine, Evelyn managed, swallowing hard against the bile rising in her throat. Just need some air. But it happened again the next morning, and the morning after that. By the fourth day, when the smell of coffee, which she normally loved, made her run for the door to be sick, she couldn't deny what her body was telling her. She was pregnant. The realization hit her with a mixture of joy and terror. A baby. She and Wyatt were going to have a baby. But the timing couldn't have been worse. They were in the middle of a fight for their survival. Winter was coming, and she had no idea how to be a mother. She told Wyatt that night, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then a smile broke across his face, transforming him. You're sure? As sure as I can be without a doctor. But all the signs that... Yes, I'm sure. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. A baby, he whispered against her hair. Our baby. Are you happy? She asked, suddenly uncertain. I know the timing isn't ideal. Happy? He pulled back to look at her, and she saw tears in his eyes. Evelyn, I'm terrified and thrilled and more grateful than I have words for. This is everything I didn't know I wanted. The joy on his face made her own fears seem smaller. But that night, lying beside him while he slept, she let herself acknowledge the full weight of her terror. Childbirth killed women. She'd heard the whispered stories in Philadelphia, knew the statistics that polite society tried to ignore. Women died bringing children into the world, especially out here where doctors were scarce and help was hours away. She pressed a hand to her still flat stomach, feeling the impossible promise of new life. This child was already loved beyond measure, but love didn't guarantee survival. Over the following weeks, Evelyn tried to continue working as before, but her body had other plans. The morning sickness was relentless, leaving her weak and shaky. She tired more easily, needed more rest, and Wyatt, once he noticed, became impossible. You shouldn't be riding, he said when she tried to saddle Copper for fence patrol. I'm pregnant, not dying. You could fall. The baby will be fine. Women have been doing physical work while pregnant since the beginning of time. But his worry wore her down. Eventually, she agreed to lighter duties, managing the household, keeping the ranch accounts, overseeing the hands' work from horseback rather than participating directly. It chafed, this forced limitation, but she understood it came from love rather than disrespect. Margaret was overjoyed at the news. A baby! Oh, Miss Evelyn, Mrs. Callahan, this is wonderful. We'll need to prepare, get everything ready, diapers and blankets and... One thing at a time, Margaret, Evelyn said, though she was secretly grateful for the older woman's enthusiasm. Having someone who was genuinely excited, who didn't see only the danger, helped balance Wyatt's anxious protectiveness. The pregnancy changed Wyatt in subtle ways. He became even more determined to end Brennan's harassment, to make Double Creek secure before the baby came. His confrontations with the neighboring rancher grew more direct, more dangerous. It came to a head in early November when Evelyn and Wyatt rode into Sweetwater Ridge for supplies and found Brennan waiting outside the general store. "Callahan," he said, his voice carrying across the street. "Heard congratulations are in order. You and the little lady expecting?" Evelyn felt Wyatt tense beside her. "Our personal business is none of your concern, Brennan. Everything that happens on land I want is my concern." Brennan's smile was cold. "Must be hard, knowing you're bringing a child into such an uncertain situation. Ranch barely hanging on, fires breaking out, cattle going missing. Dangerous place to raise a family. Is that a threat?" Wyatt's hand moved toward his gun. "Just an observation." But Brennan's eyes were hard. "Though I notice you're down to about half your herd since summer. Shame about that. Winter's going to be rough with so few cattle to sell come spring." "We'll manage." "Will you?" Brennan stepped closer, lowering his voice so only they could hear. "Here's the thing, Callahan. I respect that you're trying to protect your wife, your unborn child. That's admirable. But you're fighting a losing battle. I will have that land and the creek that runs through it. You can sell now, get enough to set yourself up somewhere else, somewhere safe. Or you can keep fighting and lose everything." "We're not selling," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Not now, not ever. You can burn our barns, steal our cattle, make our lives hell, but you cannot make us leave." Brennan's gaze shifted to her, and she saw something ugly in his expression. Brave words from a pregnant woman. But bravery doesn't stop childbirth fever, doesn't stop a baby from coming early or wrong. A lot of things can go wrong out here, Mrs. Callahan, especially for women in your condition. The threat was barely veiled. Evelyn felt ice flood her veins, but she kept her face composed. "If anything happens to me or my child, everyone will know who's responsible. You won't be able to hide behind deniability then." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Brennan said smoothly. "Not if you're sensible. Sell the ranch, move somewhere civilized where there are proper doctors, where your husband doesn't have to work himself to death trying to protect land that isn't worth dying for." "The land is worth everything to us," Wyatt said quietly. "And we're not afraid of you, Brennan." "Then you're fools," Brennan tipped his hat mockingly. "Good day, Mrs. Callahan. I do hope you have a safe delivery. Be a shame if something were to complicate matters." He walked away, leaving them standing in the street with their hearts pounding. "He threatened our baby," Evelyn said, her voice shaking with rage. "He actually threatened—" "I know." Wyatt's face was granite. "And that was a mistake. He just showed his hand." They went directly to Sheriff Davis, who listened with a troubled expression. "Problem is, he didn't technically threaten you," Davis said reluctantly. "Just made observations about the dangers of childbirth, which unfortunately are real. I can't arrest a man for stating facts, however menacing his tone." "So he gets away with it?" Evelyn demanded. "I'll talk to him. Make it clear he's being watched. But unless he does something actionable—" Davis spread his hands helplessly. Outside the sheriff's office, Evelyn felt despair threatening to overwhelm her. "What do we do, Wyatt? How do we fight someone who operates just inside the law?" "We beat him at his own game." Wyatt's voice was hard with determination. "He wants to make us afraid? We show him we're not. He wants to isolate us? We build stronger alliances. He wants to bleed us dry. We become more efficient, more profitable than he can undermine. And if none of that works, then we make sure we're ready for whatever he does next." Wyatt looked at her seriously. "Evelyn, I think we should send you to Denver for the birth. There are proper doctors there, hospitals. You'd be safer—" "No!" The word came out sharper than she intended. "I'm not running away, and I'm not having our baby anywhere but here, on our land. This isn't about pride. It's about everything. Don't you see? If I leave, Brennan wins. He gets exactly what he wants. Me out of the way, you distracted and vulnerable. I won't give him that satisfaction." "You could die, Evelyn." The blunt words hung between them. She saw the raw fear in his eyes, the terror he'd been trying to hide behind protective anger. I could die in Denver, too, she said softly. Women die in hospitals with the best doctors in the world, but I'd rather face that risk here, in my home, with you beside me, than safe and separated in some city hospital. I can't lose you. His voice cracked. If something happens, it won't. She took his hands, squeezed hard. I'm strong, Wyatt, stronger than I was when I arrived. You helped make me that way. Trust in that strength. He pulled her close, and she felt him shaking. They stood there on the boardwalk, holding each other against the cold November wind and the fear that threatened to break them both. When they returned to Double Creek, they found the hands in an uproar. Someone had ridden through during their absence and scattered the main herd, driving cattle in all directions across the rangeland. It'll take days to round them all up, Tom reported grimly, and we'll probably lose some to the cold if we can't find them quick. It was exactly the kind of harassment Brennan excelled at, damaging without being overtly violent, hard to prove, designed to exhaust and demoralize. Then we start now, Wyatt said. Everyone who can ride, mount up. We'll work in pairs, cover as much ground as possible before dark. I'll come, Evelyn started, but Wyatt cut her off. You'll stay here where it's safe. Wyatt, please. He turned to her, and she saw the barely controlled panic in his eyes. Please, Evelyn, I need to know you're safe while we're out there. I can't do this if I'm worried about you, too. She wanted to argue, but she understood. The fear of losing her, of losing the baby, was eating him alive. The least she could do was give him this one piece of peace. All right, she said quietly, but take the rifle, and be careful. It took 3 days to gather the scattered herd, 3 days during which Evelyn paced the house like a caged animal, rifle always in reach, starting at every sound. 3 nights lying awake until she heard Wyatt's footsteps, felt him collapse into bed beside her in exhausted silence. On the 4th morning, Evelyn woke to cramping pain low in her belly. For a moment she lay still, telling herself it was nothing, but when she moved and felt wetness between her legs, terror seized her. "Wyatt!" she gasped, shaking him awake. "Something's wrong!" He was alert instantly, seeing the blood on the sheets, the fear on her face. "I'm getting the doctor." "There's no time. I'll make time, Margaret." He was already pulling on his clothes, yelling for the older woman. "Stay with her. I'll be back as fast as I can." Then he was gone, and Evelyn was left with Margaret's terrified face and the cramping pain that grew worse with each passing minute. "The baby," she whispered. "Margaret, I'm losing the baby." "Hush now, don't think like that." But Margaret's hand shook as she helped Evelyn into a clean nightgown, changed the bloodied sheets. Women spot sometimes in pregnancy. Doesn't always mean... The pain intensified, doubling her over. Through the haze of fear and physical agony, Evelyn felt something fundamental shifting inside her. Too early. It was far too early for the baby to come. Time became meaningless. There was only pain and Margaret's voice talking her through it, and the terrible knowledge that she was failing Wyatt, failing their child, failing at the most basic thing women were supposed to be able to do. When Wyatt finally returned with the doctor, Evelyn was barely conscious, the blood loss making her weak and disoriented. Dr. Harrison was a stern-faced man in his 60s who'd seen everything frontier life could throw at him. He examined her quickly, efficiently, while Wyatt stood by the door looking like he might either vomit or murder someone. "She's not losing the baby," Harrison said finally, and Evelyn felt the world snap back into focus. "Not yet, anyway. But she's had a significant bleed. She needs complete bed rest. No riding, no heavy work, nothing strenuous until after the birth." "Will the baby be all right?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Can't say for certain. These early bleeds, sometimes they resolve on their own. Sometimes they're a warning of worse to come. You'll need to be watched carefully. Any increase in bleeding, any severe pain, you send for me immediately." "I'll watch her every second," Wyatt said, his voice rough with barely suppressed emotion. Harrison turned to him. "She needs to stay calm, Mr. Callahan. That means no stress, no worry, no excitement. I know you're dealing with trouble from Brennan, but she can't be part of that fight anymore. Not if you want this baby to have a chance." After the doctor left, Wyatt sat on the edge of the bed and took Evelyn's hand. His face was pale, his eyes haunted. "I almost lost you," he said quietly. Both of you. But you didn't. Evelyn squeezed his hand weakly. We're still here. We're going to be fine. You heard what Harrison said. Complete rest. That means I stay in bed and go slowly and sane while you handle everything. She tried to smile. I know. I'll do it. For the baby. For both of you. He brought her hand to his lips. I can't lose you, Evelyn. You're everything. Promise me you'll do whatever it takes to stay safe. I promise. But keeping that promise proved harder than she'd anticipated. Lying in bed day after day while the ranch work continued without her felt like torture. She could hear the hands outside, hear Margaret and Wyatt discussing ranch business in hushed voices, feel the weight of her own uselessness pressing down on her. The worst was seeing Wyatt slowly crumble under the combined weight of managing the ranch alone and worrying about her. He barely slept, barely ate, pushed himself to the point of collapse, trying to do everything. You need to rest too, she told him one night when he stumbled into bed well past midnight. I'll rest when winter's over and you're safely delivered. His voice was hollow with exhaustion. Wyatt, you can't keep going like this. You'll break. Then I'll break. He turned to her in the darkness. But I won't fail you. I won't let Brennan win. And I won't lose you or our baby because I didn't work hard enough to keep us safe. November turned to December and the first snow came, light at first, then heavier, blanketing the rangeland in white. Evelyn watched it from her window, feeling trapped and helpless. The bleeding had stopped after a week, but Harrison had been adamant, complete bed rest until at least her 7th month, longer if possible. It was during one of those endless white days that Tom brought news that changed everything. Marcus Brennan had been thrown from his horse during a storm and broken his leg badly. He'd be laid up for months, unable to manage his ranch directly. His foreman's running things now, Tom reported. But word is Hoskins doesn't have the authority to make major decisions. Brennan's son is coming out from Chicago to help, but he won't arrive until after Christmas. Wyatt and Evelyn exchanged glances. It was an opportunity, a breathing space where Brennan's harassment might ease while his operation was in disarray. We use this time to strengthen our position, Wyatt said. Get through winter, build our herd back up, maybe even expand. By spring, we'll be strong enough that Brennan can't push us around anymore. And for the first time in months, Evelyn felt hope kindle in her chest. December passed in a blur of snow and preparation. Wyatt managed the ranch with help from the hands, while Evelyn directed operations from her bed, keeping the accounts, planning spring improvements, maintaining the business side of things. On Christmas morning, Wyatt brought her breakfast in bed and a small package wrapped in brown paper. I don't have much to give you, he said, almost shyly, but I wanted you to have something. Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. When she opened it, she found a tiny photograph of Wyatt on one side, the other left empty. For the baby's picture, he explained, when he or she comes. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. It's perfect. Thank you. No, thank you. He sat beside her carefully. For not giving up. For staying. For giving me everything I never knew I needed. She pulled him down for a kiss, careful of her still fragile condition, but pouring everything she felt into the contact. When they broke apart, both were smiling despite their tears. We're going to make it, Evelyn whispered. All three of us. Yes, Wyatt agreed, his hand settling gently on the swell of her belly where their child grew. We are. Winter deepened its grip on Wyoming territory, transforming Double Creek Ranch into a landscape of white silence broken only by the wind and the occasional bawling of cattle seeking shelter. Evelyn watched the world from her window, her body growing heavy with child, while her spirit chafed at the confinement. By mid-January, she was nearly 7 months along, and Dr. Harrison finally gave her permission to move about the house, though he still forbade any strenuous activity. You're doing well, he said during one of his weekly visits, his stern face softening slightly as he examined her. The baby's heartbeat is strong. If you can make it another 2 months, you'll both have excellent chances. 2 months felt like an eternity, but Evelyn had learned patience in the brutal school of frontier survival. She spent her days managing the ranch accounts, planning spring operations, and working on the small garments Margaret had taught her to sew. Her fingers, once smooth and useless, now handled needle and thread with the same competence they'd learned to handle rope and reins. Wyatt came in from the cold one evening in late January, stomping snow from his boots, his face thoughtful rather than exhausted for the first time in weeks. "Brennan's son arrived today," he said without preamble. "I saw him in town. He's nothing like his father." Evelyn set down her sewing, instantly alert. "What do you mean?" "Younger, for one thing, maybe 30. But more than that, he seemed reasonable. When I passed him on the street, he tipped his hat, actually acknowledged me like a neighbor instead of an enemy." "That could be strategy," Evelyn warned, though she felt a flicker of hope. "Making you lower your guard." "Maybe, but Tom talked to some of the Broken Bee hands at the saloon. They say young Brennan, goes by James, has been asking a lot of questions about how his father's been running things. Seems he doesn't approve of everything he's hearing." The hope grew stronger. "Do you think he might be different?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." Wyatt knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "What would you think about me riding over to the Broken Bee tomorrow, extending an olive branch, seeing if James Brennan is interested in peace between our ranches?" Fear clutched at Evelyn's heart. "What if it's a trap? What if Marcus is using his son to lure you in?" "Marcus is laid up with that broken leg. His men say he barely leaves his room, and I won't go alone. I'll take Tom with me. But Evelyn, if there's a chance to end this fight without more bloodshed, don't we have to try? Especially now with the baby coming?" She wanted to say no, to keep him safe at home, but she understood the weight he'd been carrying, the constant vigilance that was slowly breaking him down. If there was even the smallest possibility of peace, they had to pursue it. "All right," she said quietly, "but you promise me you'll be careful. At the first sign of trouble, I'll ride out faster than I came in." He kissed her forehead. "I promise." He left the next morning, and Evelyn spent the day in an agony of waiting, pacing the house despite Margaret's protests, starting at every sound. When she finally heard hoofbeats in late afternoon, she rushed to the window with her heart in her throat. Wyatt dismounted slowly, his face unreadable. But as he walked toward the house, she saw something in his bearing that made her breath catch. Not defeat, but cautious optimism. "Well?" she demanded the moment he came through the door. "James Brennan wants to make things right," Wyatt said, sinking into a chair with visible relief. "He's appalled by what his father's been doing. Says he came out here planning to help manage the Broken Bee, not knowing the full extent of Marcus's tactics." "Do you believe him?" "I think so. He was straightforward, offered to make restitution for the cattle we lost, the barn fire. Says his father's way of doing business is outdated and destructive. He wants to run a legitimate operation, not a criminal enterprise." Evelyn lowered herself carefully into the chair opposite him. "What did you say?" "I told him we'd accept his offer of restitution, but that we'd need proof of good faith. Actions, not just words." Wyatt's expression was serious. He agreed. Said to give him a month to get his father's operation under control, and he'd prove his intentions are honest. "A month?" Evelyn repeated. 1 month until her baby was due. 1 month to see if this fragile peace would hold. "And Marcus? What does he think of his son's peace offering?" "According to James, his father is furious. But he's also bedridden and dependent on his son now. James controls the ranch finances, the decision-making. Marcus can rage all he wants, but he's lost his power." It felt too good to be true. But over the following weeks, James Brennan proved as good as his word. Broken Bee hands stopped harassing Double Creek cattle. Small amounts of money began arriving, restitution for documented losses. And when Evelyn and Wyatt rode into Sweetwater Ridge for supplies, James himself approached them on the street. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, removing his hat respectfully, "I wanted to apologize personally for the distress my father caused you, especially given your condition. It was unconscionable." Evelyn studied him carefully. He had his father's height, but softer features, and his eyes held genuine remorse. "Your apology means nothing if the harassment continues," she said bluntly. "It won't." "You have my word." James glanced at Wyatt. "I know words are cheap, but I grew up in Chicago, learned business from my mother's family. They taught me that sustainable success comes from cooperation, not conquest. My father's approach might have worked in the Old West, but times are changing. We can either change with them or get left behind. Your father won't like being left behind, Wyatt observed. No, he won't. But his leg isn't healing well. The doctor says he may never ride again. He's talking about moving back east, to my sister's house in Philadelphia. James paused, looking at Evelyn with sudden interest. Philadelphia. That's where you're from originally, isn't it, Mrs. Callahan? It is, Evelyn said carefully, wondering where this was going. My father mentioned it. Said you'd fled some scandal. James's expression was kind. For what it's worth, seems like his loss was Wyoming's gain. After he left, Evelyn and Wyatt stood in silence for a moment. Philadelphia, Wyatt said quietly. Are you all right? I'm fine. And surprisingly, she was. The mention of her old life didn't carry the same sting it once had. Philadelphia felt like a story about someone else, a woman she'd been in another lifetime. That person doesn't exist anymore. She died somewhere between the stagecoach and the water trough where you pulled me to safety. I don't know, Wyatt said, pulling her close as much as her swollen belly would allow. I think she's still in there, just stronger now, more herself. February arrived with bitter cold that kept everyone close to home. Evelyn's body grew increasingly uncomfortable, the baby moving constantly inside her. At night, she lay awake feeling the life she and Wyatt had created shifting and turning, preparing for its entrance into the world. Are you scared? Wyatt asked one night, his hand resting on her belly. Terrified, she admitted, but also ready. I want to meet this person we made. I want to hold our baby, see whose eyes they have, watch them discover everything we've built here. They'll have your courage and your steadiness. She turned to face him in the darkness. Wyatt, if something goes wrong, nothing's going to go wrong. But if it does, she pressed her fingers to his lips when he started to protest. If something happens to me, I need you to promise you'll tell our child about this, about how we met, how we fought for this land, how we built something real out here. I need them to know I chose this life, that I chose you. Evelyn, promise me. I promise. His voice was rough with emotion. But you're going to be here to tell them yourself. You're going to watch them grow up on this land, teach them to ride like you learned, show them how to be as strong as you are. She wanted to believe him, but the fear lived in her bones now, a constant companion as her body prepared for the ordeal ahead. On a crystal-clear morning in early March, Evelyn woke to pain that was different from the practice contractions she'd been experiencing for weeks. This was deeper, more purposeful, and it came in waves that took her breath away. It's time, she said to Wyatt, who jerked awake instantly. What followed was a blur of controlled chaos. Margaret rushing to prepare the bedroom. Tom riding hard for Dr. Harrison. The Morrison brothers awkwardly offering help before retreating to the barn when Margaret shooed them away. And through it all, Evelyn laboring with a determination born of months of waiting. The pain was worse than anything she'd imagined, worse than the fear, worse than the hardest days of ranch work. It consumed her, reduced her to something primal and essential. Between contractions, she clung to Wyatt's hand while Margaret coached her breathing. You're doing well, Margaret said, though her face was pale with worry. Just keep breathing through it. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, then began its descent. Dr. Harrison arrived and examined her with efficient professionalism. The baby's positioned well, he said, but it's going to be a while yet. First babies usually are. How long? Evelyn gasped between contractions. Could be hours. Could be tomorrow. Every birth is different. He turned to Wyatt. Mr. Callahan, you might want to wait outside. This isn't really appropriate for... I'm staying, Wyatt said firmly. My wife wants me here, and I'm not leaving her. Harrison looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Wyatt's face stopped him. Suit yourself, just try not to faint. I don't have time to tend to two patients. The afternoon wore into evening. Evelyn's world narrowed to pain and breathing, to Wyatt's voice anchoring her through each contraction, to the desperate desire for it all to be over. She'd thought she understood suffering, but this redefined it. I can't, she sobbed at one point, exhausted beyond measure. I can't do this anymore. Yes, you can. Wyatt's face was close to hers, his eyes fierce. You're the strongest person I know, Evelyn. You left everything behind and built a new life from nothing. You faced down Brennan, survived threats and fire and harassment. You can do this. This is different. No, it's the same. It's fighting for what matters. And right now, nothing matters more than bringing our baby safely into the world. So you keep fighting. You hear me? You don't quit. Not now. His words gave her something to hold on to through the next wave of pain and the next. Somewhere around midnight, Harrison's voice changed. All right, Mrs. Callahan, it's time to push. On the next contraction, I need you to bear down with everything you have. What followed was the hardest work of Evelyn's life. Harder than learning to rope, harder than mending miles of fence, harder than every difficult day combined. Her body felt like it was tearing apart, and she screamed with the effort of bringing her child into the world. That's it, Harrison encouraged. I can see the head. One more big push. Evelyn gathered every ounce of strength she had left and pushed with everything in her. The pain reached a crescendo that whited out her vision, and then suddenly, impossibly, it eased. A baby's cry filled the room. It's a girl, Harrison announced, his stern face breaking into a rare smile. A healthy baby girl. Evelyn collapsed back against the pillows, sobbing with relief and exhaustion and overwhelming joy. Beside her, Wyatt was crying too, his face transformed by wonder as Harrison cleaned the baby and placed her in Evelyn's arms. She was perfect, tiny and red-faced and furious at being thrust into the cold world, but absolutely perfect. She had a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn blue like her father's, and when her little hand wrapped around Evelyn's finger, the grip was surprisingly strong. Hello, Grace, Evelyn whispered, the name coming to her with sudden certainty. Hello, my beautiful girl. We've been waiting for you. Grace, Wyatt repeated, touching his daughter's face with trembling fingers. Grace Callahan. It's perfect. The baby quieted at the sound of her father's voice, her unfocused eyes trying to find his face, and in that moment, watching Wyatt fall in love with their daughter, Evelyn felt something settle in her chest, a rightness so profound it made everything else fade to insignificance. This was what she'd left Philadelphia to find, not just land or freedom or escape, but this, family, belonging, love in its purest form. Dr. Harrison finished his work efficiently. Mother and baby are both healthy, he pronounced. You did well, Mrs. Callahan, better than most first-time mothers. Now you need rest, real rest, no getting up for at least a week. After he left, Margaret shooed Wyatt out briefly to clean up the room and help Evelyn into a fresh nightgown. But he was back within minutes, unwilling to be separated from his wife and newborn daughter for long. They spent that first night in a cocoon of wonder, taking turns holding Grace, marveling at her tiny perfection, learning the fierce protectiveness that comes with parenthood. And when Evelyn finally drifted into exhausted sleep, it was with her daughter cradled against her chest and Wyatt's arm around them both. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and steep learning curves. Grace was a demanding baby, hungry and loud, but Evelyn wouldn't have changed anything. Each cry, each feeding, each tiny milestone felt like a miracle. Wyatt proved to be a devoted father, walking Grace when she fussed, changing her diapers without complaint, singing to her in his deep voice until she settled. The hands took turns peering at the baby with awkward fascination, and even crusty old Tom went soft around the eyes when Grace wrapped her tiny hand around his calloused finger. She's going to be a heartbreaker, he predicted. Got her mama's determination and her daddy's stubbornness. Heaven help us all. Spring arrived in earnest, melting the snow and revealing the land they'd fought so hard to keep. And with the spring thaw came news that changed everything. Marcus Brennan was leaving Wyoming for good. His leg had healed poorly, leaving him unable to ride or manage a ranch. James had officially taken over the Broken Bee and was already implementing changes. Better pay for the hands, ethical business practices, cooperation instead of competition with neighboring ranches. My father sends his regards, James said when he stopped by Double Creek in early April with a formal gift for baby Grace, a beautiful handmade cradle that must have cost a small fortune. And his apologies, though he'd never say it himself. He asked me to give you this. He handed Wyatt a sealed envelope. Inside was a deed, water rights to a section of Silver Creek that Marcus had been trying to claim for years, now formally transferred to Double Creek Ranch. He said to tell you he respects strength, James explained. You and Mrs. Callahan stood up to him when most would have folded. He may not like losing, but he knows when he's beaten. After James left, Evelyn and Wyatt stood in their yard holding their daughter, looking out over land that was finally, truly secure. "We did it," Evelyn said softly. "We actually did it." "No," Wyatt corrected, pulling her close. "You did it. You came out here alone, facing down everything this territory could throw at you. I just helped." "We did it together," she insisted. "That's the whole point, isn't it? Neither of us could have managed alone, but together we can handle anything." He kissed her temple. "Think you can handle about 50 more years of Wyoming winters and stubborn cattle?" "I think I can handle anything, as long as you're beside me." The years that followed proved the truth of those words. Double Creek Ranch prospered under their joint management, growing from a struggling operation into one of the most successful in the county. They had 2 more children, a son they named Samuel after her uncle, and another daughter they called Margaret in honor of the woman who'd stood by Evelyn through everything. Grace grew up strong and fearless, learning to ride before she could properly walk, helping with ranch work as soon as she was old enough. She had her mother's determination and her father's steady nature, and watching her grow filled Evelyn with a pride that sometimes brought tears to her eyes. "She's so much like you," Wyatt observed one evening when Grace was 10, watching their daughter expertly rope a calf on her first try. "She's like both of us," Evelyn corrected. "The best parts of both of us." They stood together on the porch of the house they'd expanded over the years, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in impossible colors. The same sky that had terrified and exhilarated Evelyn that first day, now as familiar and beloved as Wyatt's face. "Do you ever regret it?" Wyatt asked quietly. "Leaving Philadelphia, everything you knew?" Evelyn thought of the woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach a decade ago, frightened, desperate, running from scandal with no idea what she'd find in Wyoming territory. That woman had been so small, so constrained by other people's expectations. "Never," she said firmly, "not for a single moment. Philadelphia gave me nothing but shame and limitation. This place, this wild, impossible, beautiful place, gave me everything. It gave me you, it gave me our children. It gave me a life that's actually mine." "I love you, Evelyn Callahan." "I love you too." She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. For that first day, when you pulled me behind that water trough and treated me like I was worth protecting. For teaching me to survive out here. For loving me exactly as I am." "That's easy," Wyatt said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're the easiest person in the world to love." Inside the house, they could hear their children laughing, Margaret calling them to dinner. The sounds of family, of home, of a life built on honesty and hard work and stubborn refusal to give up. Evelyn had left Philadelphia in disgrace, fleeing a scandal that had destroyed her reputation. She'd arrived in Wyoming territory with nothing but determination and her uncle's legacy. And from that unpromising beginning, she'd built something extraordinary. Not just a successful ranch, though Double Creek had become that. Not just a loving marriage, though she and Wyatt had created that too. But a life that was authentically, completely, joyfully hers. A life where she could be strong and capable, where her opinions mattered, where she was valued for her competence rather than her compliance. As they walked inside together, Wyatt's arm around her waist, Evelyn felt grateful for every hardship that had brought her to this moment. The scandal that had driven her west. The gunfight that had introduced her to her future husband. The struggles and dangers and desperate times that had forged her into someone strong enough to claim this life. "Mama, look!" Grace called, holding up a drawing she'd made of the ranch. "This is us. This is our family." Evelyn took the paper carefully, studying the stick figures that represented her family, the simple house that had become their home, the vast landscape surrounding it all. Grace had drawn the sky impossibly big, just as it looked in reality, endless and full of promise. "It's perfect, sweetheart," Evelyn said, pulling her daughter close. "Absolutely perfect." And it was. All of it. The land they'd fought for, the family they'd created, the future spreading out before them as vast and full of possibility as that Wyoming sky. She'd whispered to Wyatt once that she'd never shared a bed, uncertain and afraid of intimacy. And he'd promised that she'd share his heart too. But the truth was even better than his promise. They didn't just share a bed or hearts, They shared everything: dreams and fears, triumphs and failures, the endless work of building a life together. That night, after the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet, Evelyn stood at her bedroom window looking out at the stars. Wyatt came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, and they stood together in comfortable silence. "What are you thinking?" he asked eventually. "That exile was the greatest gift I ever received," Evelyn said softly. "I thought leaving Philadelphia meant losing everything, but I was wrong. It meant finding everything that actually mattered. We found each other." "Yes, and we found this." She gestured at the land beyond the window. "Our place in the world, our purpose, our home." "No regrets?" "Only that I wasted so many years trying to be someone I wasn't." She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who taught her what real partnership meant. "But I'm exactly who I'm meant to be now, and I'm exactly where I belong." Wyatt kissed her softly, a benediction and a promise. "Always," he murmured against her lips. "You'll always belong here, with me, with our family, under this impossible sky." And as Evelyn fell asleep that night in her husband's arms, in the house they'd made into a home, on the land they'd fought so hard to keep, she knew with bone-deep certainty that she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along. Not escape, not safety, not even freedom, exactly, but belonging, the kind that comes from choosing your own path and walking it with someone who sees you, truly sees you, and loves what they see. The scandal that had driven her from Philadelphia was ancient history now, forgotten by everyone except as a cautionary tale whispered in drawing rooms. But Evelyn didn't think of it that way. She thought of it as the beginning of her real life, the moment when everything false fell away and everything true could finally begin. She'd come to Wyoming territory broken and desperate, fleeing shame with no idea what awaited her, and she'd found a gunfight, a cowboy with steel blue eyes, and a love that had transformed them both. From that first kiss beside Silver Creek to this moment, decades later, she and Wyatt had built something that would last long after they were gone. Not just the ranch that bore both their names, but a legacy of strength and partnership, of love earned through shared hardship and celebrated in shared joy. Their children would inherit this land, and they would tell their own children about the Eastern woman who'd claimed her uncle's ranch and fought to keep it, about the rancher who'd seen past her Philadelphia polish to the steel underneath, about how they'd stood together against everything Wyoming could throw at them and emerged not just surviving, but thriving. And someday, years from now, when someone asked how it all began, the answer would be simple. It began with a gunshot and a cowboy who smiled and said the words she'd been waiting her whole life to hear. It began with someone finally seeing her for who she truly was. It began with two broken people finding each other in the vast Wyoming wilderness and discovering that together they were whole. It began with sharing not just a bed, but a heart. And from that sharing, they'd built everything that mattered. The end and the beginning all at once.